My wife said, "Your manhood is toxic," so I turned into the evolved man she wanted and watched life fall apart until she begged for the true me back. My wife publicly dismantled our marriage at a family barbecue, calling everything I did toxic. The words hit me like a physical blow, surrounded by people I loved, holding a plate of ribs I'd smoked for hours. What I decided to do next changed everything. The afternoon sun beat down on my parents' backyard, the air thick with charcoal smoke and a forced cheerfulness that suddenly felt razor-thin. See, the irony of that moment? It still hits me like a freight train. For 32 years, Liam, genuinely believed I was the ideal husband. I handled car maintenance, fixed the garbage disposal at 2 a.m., and always carried the heavy groceries because Chloe had a bad back from an old car accident. I worked 50-hour weeks as a project manager so she could chase her graphic design dreams without financial pressure. My father, David, taught me manhood was about showing up, providing, protecting, no complaints. My mother, Sarah, reinforced that actions, not words, define real love through sacrifice. Chloe married me, so I thought she appreciated it. She smiled when I fixed things, thanked me for managing our finances. She never once complained about how I approached our marriage. That Saturday started like any other. My dad, David, was focused on the grill. My mom, Sarah, set out her famous potato salad. Chloe's sister, Olivia, had driven from Phoenix with her new boyfriend, who kept checking his phone every 5 minutes. The backyard smelled like charcoal and barbecue sauce, the kind of scent that makes you feel safe, nostalgic. Chloe seemed relaxed, laughing at something Olivia said, sipping wine in the late afternoon sun. I remember thinking how beautiful she looked in her yellow sundress, truly grateful for the life we'd built. Then, dinner started. About 20 minutes in, just after my dad finished his story about getting locked in the shed, Chloe stood up. She tapped her wine glass with a fork, like at a wedding, and everyone went quiet. I thought she'd announce something exciting, maybe pregnancy, or a big client for her design work. Instead, she cleared her throat and said she wanted to share something important with everyone who mattered most to her. My stomach dropped before she even spoke. Her tone had this rehearsed quality, like she'd practiced it. "I've been doing a lot of reading lately," she began, "about relationship dynamics and gender roles, and I've come to realize something really important about our marriage." The exclamation point in her voice should have been my first warning. She went on, reflecting on how traditional masculinity showed up in our relationship, how much we considered normal was rooted in patriarchal structures that limited both of us. My dad's face went blank, trying to process something that just didn't compute. My mom stopped chewing mid-bite. Olivia's boyfriend suddenly became fascinated by his coleslaw. Chloe kept going. "Liam embodies a lot of toxic masculine traits, and I think it's time we acknowledge that so he can evolve into a more emotionally available and progressive partner." The word toxic hung there, a venomous cloud. She rattled off examples. Me always driving on long trips denied her agency, managing finances infantilized her, fixing things around the house without asking if she wanted to learn robbed her of growth, making decisions about home security and maintenance without consulting her was controlling behavior. Every single thing I'd proudly considered being a good husband, she was twisting into evidence of my problematic nature. I heard my mom's sharp intake of breath and my dad's fork scrape his plate. In the silence, Olivia looked mortified, staring at the table like she wished she could disappear. Part of me wanted to defend myself. To scream that Chloe had never once complained, that she'd actively encouraged me to handle finances because she hated budgets, that she thanked me just last week for fixing the leaky faucet. But then, a strange clarity washed over me. Arguing was useless. This wasn't about logic, it was about her online echo chamber, her new therapist, those podcasts she'd been binge listening to. No rational discussion would work. This wasn't about me, it was about her needing to feel enlightened. So, instead of fighting, instead of anger, I did something that stunned everyone, even myself. I carefully set my fork down, looked straight at Chloe, and smiled. Not fake, not bitter, just unsettlingly genuine. "You know what?" I said, my voice calm, almost cheerful. "You're absolutely right. Confusion flashed across Chloe's face. This clearly wasn't the reaction she'd expected. I told her I'd been operating under outdated assumptions about marriage, and I appreciated her brave honesty in calling me out. I said I was committed to evolving into the kind of partner she deserved, someone who rejected traditional masculine roles and embraced true equality in every aspect of our relationship. My dad made a noise that might have been a cough or a strangled protest. My mom reached over and grabbed his hand, physically stopping him. Chloe's expression shifted from surprised to pleased, like she'd just won an argument she didn't know she was having. She sat back down and squeezed my hand across the table, saying she was proud of me for being so receptive, that this was the beginning of a better chapter. Olivia looked relieved. Dinner continued with forced normalcy, but I barely tasted my food. Inside my head, a plan was forming, cold and clear as ice water. If Chloe wanted me to stop being traditionally masculine, if she wanted true equality without any of those protective instincts or provider behaviors she just labeled as toxic, then that's exactly what she was going to get. Not halfway, not partially, but completely and absolutely. I was going to give her the evolved man she demanded, and I was going to do it so thoroughly, so precisely that she'd understand exactly what she'd asked for. On the drive home, Chloe talked excitedly about our breakthrough, how she'd worried I'd react defensively. I kept my eyes on the road, making agreeable noises, mentally cataloging every single thing I did daily that she'd just categorized as problematic. It was a longer list than I'd realized. When we got home, I told her that starting tomorrow, I was implementing immediate changes to ensure I respected her full autonomy and agency. She kissed my cheek and said she loved me, completely missing the edge in my voice. That night, while she slept, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, thinking about the garbage disposal I'd fixed, the tire I'd changed in the rain last month, the spiders I'd removed, the bills I'd organized, the security system I'd installed, the gutters I'd cleaned, the flat tire I'd changed on her car last winter at midnight. Every single act of service I thought demonstrated love was apparently just evidence of my toxic need to control and protect. Fine, I thought. Let's see how long love survives without any of that foundation. She didn't know it yet, but Chloe had just dismantled our entire marriage with one speech. And tomorrow morning, I was going to stand back and let her watch it collapse. The evolution began the next morning at 6:30 when my alarm went off. I did something I'd never done in 7 years of marriage. I got up, made myself a single cup of coffee in my travel mug, grabbed my keys, and headed out for work. I didn't make Chloe's usual cappuccino. It sounds petty, but that cappuccino was our morning routine. Something I did automatically while she showered, timed perfectly so it was hot when she came downstairs. That morning, she came down in her bathrobe, expecting it, and found nothing. I was already gone. She texted me around 8, asking if everything was okay. I replied that everything was great. I was just respecting her autonomy by not assuming she needed me to make her coffee like she couldn't handle basic tasks herself. She sent back a confused emoji but didn't push it. That was Monday. By Wednesday, the small changes had started to pile up, creating friction neither of us acknowledged directly. Our garbage disposal had been rattling for 2 days, the kind of sound that meant something was stuck. Normally, I would have fixed it, but when Chloe mentioned it, I told her I had complete faith in her ability to troubleshoot mechanical issues and didn't want to rob her of the learning opportunity. She stared at me, then said she'd look up a YouTube tutorial. 3 days later, the disposal was still rattling. She never watched the video. The dog food situation became an issue on Thursday. Our 70-pound German Shepherd, Duke, went through a 40-pound bag of kibble every 3 weeks. I always kept the bag in the garage and filled his bowl because lifting it required muscle, and Chloe had that bad back. Thursday evening, she went to feed Duke and found his container empty. The new bag was in the trunk of my car where I'd left it after the pet store. She asked me to bring it in, and I explained, very pleasantly, that I was working on not automatically assuming physical tasks were my responsibility. Carrying heavy objects was something any capable adult could manage with proper lifting technique, and I believed in her strength. Chloe's jaw tightened, but she didn't say anything. She tried to lift the bag, struggled for a solid minute, then dragged it across the garage floor and left it there. Duke ate half portions for 2 days until I finally brought it inside. Not because she asked, but because I felt bad for the dog. The washing machine incident happened the following week, and this is where things went from annoying to problematic. Our high-efficiency front loader occasionally gets mold buildup if you don't clean the rubber seal, and it had started to smell like mildew. Chloe asked if I could take a look. I reminded her that household maintenance was a shared responsibility, and I trusted her judgment on how to handle it. She got frustrated, saying she knew nothing about washing machine maintenance. I suggested she Google it or call a repair person, that I was trying not to be the kind of husband who treated her like she was incapable of problem solving. The machine smelled worse, and our clothes started coming out with a sour odor, meaning we had to rewash everything. She eventually called a repair guy who charged us $200 for what I could have done in 15 minutes with bleach and a rag. Chloe didn't speak to me for the rest of that evening. The grocery situation became a weekly nightmare. I had always done the shopping because I left work earlier than Chloe, and the store was on my way home. Plus, I was better at meal planning and sticking to a budget. Now, I only bought food for myself, carefully calculating portions, leaving her to handle her own nutrition. The first week, she didn't realize what was happening until she went to make dinner and discovered we had ingredients for exactly one meal. She asked where everything else was, and I explained that I was practicing not making unilateral decisions about household needs, that buying food for both of us without consultation was presumptuous and controlling. Chloe ordered takeout that night, and I could see her mentally calculating how much this new arrangement was going to cost. Our friends started noticing the change at a barbecue we hosted 3 weeks into my evolution. My buddy Michael and his wife brought their new patio furniture set, an 8-piece deal with cushions and a table, wanting to assemble it in our backyard. Michael naturally asked if I could help him carry the boxes from his truck. I politely declined, saying I was working on not perpetuating stereotypes about men always handling physical labor. Everyone kind of laughed awkwardly, thinking I was joking, until they realized I was serious. Michael and his wife struggled with the boxes themselves while I sat on our deck drinking a beer. Chloe's face turned red, but she couldn't say anything without contradicting her own speech about toxic masculinity. Later that evening, after everyone left, she said I was being deliberately unhelpful. I asked her, very calmly, what part of respecting equality and rejecting traditional gender roles she wanted me to stop doing. She didn't have an answer. The car situation is what finally scared her. It was a rainy morning in late June, and Chloe's Honda wouldn't start, just made that clicking sound that usually means a dead battery. She called me from the driveway, clearly expecting me to come out and either jump it or figure out the problem. I was in the middle of my morning coffee. I told her that car trouble was stressful, but I had confidence she could handle it, that calling AAA or watching a YouTube video on jump-starting would be a great growth opportunity. Her voice got sharp. She said she was going to be late for a client meeting. I reminded her that I was working on not rushing to solve her problems like she was incapable, that this was exactly the kind of protective behavior she'd identified as toxic. She hung up on me. I watched from the kitchen window as she stood in the rain, trying to figure out the hood latch, then gave up and called an Uber that cost her $45. I jump-started her car that evening in about 3 minutes. The breaking point came on a Friday night. Chloe was coming home late from a client meeting downtown. She called me around 9 o'clock, her voice shaking, saying there was a guy following her from the parking garage to her car, and she was scared. My old instinct was to tell her to stay on the phone, to get to a populated area, to scream if he got too close, maybe even drive over there myself. Instead, I said very calmly that I trusted her judgment in handling the situation and that she was a strong, independent woman who didn't need a man to feel safe. I added that calling the police or building security would be more effective than relying on outdated damsel-in-distress dynamics. She made a sound like she'd been slapped, and the line went dead. She didn't answer when I called back. 20 minutes later, I heard her car pull into the driveway. She walked past me without speaking, went straight upstairs, and I heard the bedroom door lock. The next morning, she came downstairs, her eyes puffy like she'd been crying. She said she couldn't do this anymore, that the house was falling apart, everything was harder than it needed to be, and she felt completely alone despite being married. I asked her what specifically she wanted me to change. She struggled to articulate it because doing so would mean admitting that all those traditional masculine behaviors she'd called toxic were actually things she needed. She finally said, "I want my husband back," her voice cracking. I looked at her carefully and asked, "Which one?" She went quiet, understanding. Did she want the husband who fixed things, carried heavy bags, made her coffee, and protected her? Or did she want the evolved, progressive partner who treated her like a fully autonomous adult who needed none of that? She couldn't have both, and we both knew it. She whispered that she didn't know, and I told her to figure it out because I was tired of being criticized for caring. The house quickly descended into chaos over the next 2 weeks. I watched it happen with the detachment of someone observing a controlled experiment. Dishes piled high in the sink because Chloe kept forgetting to run the dishwasher, and I no longer reminded her. The lawn grew tall enough that our neighbor left a passive-aggressive note about neighborhood standards. Our German Shepherd, Duke, tracked mud through the living room because nobody had fixed the loose board on the back porch that created a giant puddle when it rained. Our bedroom had boxes of Chloe's design supplies stacked against one wall because I'd always been the one to install shelving and organize storage solutions. The light bulb in the hallway burned out and stayed dark for 6 days. Every small thing I used to handle automatically became a glaring, visible absence, like watching a building lean after its scaffolding was removed. Chloe stopped eating regular meals because coordinating groceries and cooking without any system overwhelmed her after long workdays. I'd find her at 10 at night eating cereal or crackers, looking exhausted and defeated. She lost weight, and the shadows under her eyes got darker. Her design work started suffering, too, because she was too stressed and tired to meet deadlines. I watched her panic over a client presentation she'd normally nail without breaking a sweat. On a Sunday morning, 2 weeks after our conversation, she came downstairs and found me reading on the couch. She sat down on the coffee table directly in front of me, so I had to look at her, and said she needed to say something. Her voice was steady, but I could see her hands shaking. She confessed she'd been utterly, stupidly wrong. That the speech she'd made at my parents' house was the dumbest thing she'd ever done. She'd been caught up in online communities where women competed to be the most progressive and critical of their partners, where every act of traditional masculinity got labeled as problematic, regardless of context or intent. She admitted she'd felt pressure to perform wokeness, to prove she wasn't some suburban housewife who needed a man, and in trying to score points with strangers on the internet, she'd sabotaged the actual good marriage she had with someone who genuinely loved her. "Your masculinity was never toxic," she choked out, tears starting now, real tears, not manipulative ones. "It was protective. And I'm sorry. I couldn't see that until it was gone." I closed my book and let her talk. She continued, saying she'd called her therapist and realized that most of what she'd been reading online was performative nonsense that didn't account for real relationships with real people who had different strengths and preferences. She said she didn't want a gender-neutral roommate. She wanted her husband back, the one who gave a damn about her well-being, even if it meant doing things she could technically do herself. She acknowledged that there was a difference between controlling behavior and caring behavior, between infantilizing someone and simply loving them enough to make their life easier. I sat there for a long moment because this was the crossroads, and what I said next would determine whether we had a marriage worth saving. I told her, very clearly, I would never again be publicly humiliated for being the man my father taught me to be. If she wanted me back, she needed to understand, I would fix things, carry heavy bags, make her coffee, handle the finances, and protect her. Not because I thought she was incapable, but because that's how I showed love, and I wouldn't apologize for it anymore. She could either accept that this was who I was and appreciate it, or I would help her pack, and we could go our separate ways. But I was done walking on eggshells in my own marriage. Chloe nodded and said she understood. Then she asked what she could do to fix this. I told her there was one thing. 3 days later, we were back at my parents' house for dinner. I could see the tension in my dad's shoulders when we walked in, like he was bracing for another awkward speech. My mom hugged us both, but her smile was cautious. We sat down to eat, and about halfway through the meal, Chloe stood up and tapped her glass, exactly like she'd done before. The entire table went silent. I saw my dad's jaw clench. Chloe's hands trembled, but her voice was clear when she spoke. "A few weeks ago," she said, "I stood here and said some things about Liam that I need to publicly correct." She explained she'd accused me of toxic masculinity when the truth was that everything I did came from a place of love and partnership. She'd been influenced by social media narratives that painted traditional male behavior as inherently problematic, without acknowledging context or intention. She told my parents their son was the best man she knew, that he'd spent our entire marriage making her life better in countless ways she'd taken for granted, and that she was grateful every single day that he'd chosen to be patient with her while she figured out what actually mattered. "Liam isn't toxic," she finished, her voice breaking slightly. "He's exactly the kind of husband any woman should hope for, and I'm sorry I didn't say that the first time." My mother immediately started crying. My father's whole face softened in a way I hadn't seen in weeks. He reached across the table and squeezed my shoulder without saying anything because he didn't need to. After dinner, I fixed the garbage disposal that had been rattling, carried in Duke's food without being asked, and made Chloe her cappuccino the next morning. She watched me do these things with a different expression than before, not entitlement, but genuine appreciation. 2 weeks later, Chloe asked if she could post something on her Instagram and showed me the draft. It was a photo of us from our wedding and a long caption about how she'd almost destroyed her marriage by confusing strength with toxicity and partnership with oppression. She wrote about learning the difference between a man who controls you and a man who protects you, between someone who infantilizes you and someone who simply loves you enough to make your life easier. The post got hundreds of comments, mostly from women sharing similar realizations. Some criticized her for being anti-feminist, but plenty more thanked her for saying what they'd been afraid to admit. Things aren't perfect, marriage never is. But they're real. Chloe thanks me when I fix things, I thank her for the emotional labor I struggle with. We're building something honest, not performing for an invisible, uncaring audience. I learned something profound through all of this, something I wish I'd understood earlier. The strongest thing you can sometimes do in a relationship isn't to fight or argue or explain. It's to step back and let someone experience the full weight of what they're asking for. Chloe didn't need a lecture. She needed to live in the absence of everything she took for granted. Sometimes, to appreciate what you have to lose it, even temporarily, even if it hurts you both. My masculinity wasn't the problem, her need for independence wasn't true independence. It was a lack of gratitude. And sometimes, you have to clear the table completely for someone to finally see what was there all along. What do you think about this story?